If we take these services seriously, then we have a lot of work to do. If we come for the sake of good music, to be entertained, even to be uplifted, to be moved somehow, but not to move, then maybe we're missing the essential element of being moved. Not merely to be moved in here and yet to remain stationary, but to be changed so that the change is visible in our lives a moment after this moment. Otherwise, this is just beautiful music and poetry. So I'll tell you a story. The story is of a synagogue. We've heard of them. And a rabbi who gets up every Shabbos morning and every holiday to make a sermon. And every time he stands up to make the sermon, he looks out, and one guy in the third row at that moment always chooses to fall asleep and remains asleep for the duration of the sermon. And the rabbi starts to look down at his papers, and he looks up, and every time he sees this guy, finally, after a number of weeks, he goes up to him and he says, Shmueli, he says, I just have a question for you. I'm trying to understand. Every time before I even say a word of my sermon, you're asleep. Why? And Shmueli says, because Rabbi, I have faith in you. He'll put him to sleep. I want to talk about something a little more serious than that. Not your sleep, but by the way, I can see anybody who's sleeping. The lighting's excellent. But I want us to think about something, and it's a fallacy, and I think it's a somewhat dangerous fallacy. And it's a fallacy that probably creates a kind of misgiving, a misunderstanding, a disconnection, a struggle in prayer in these moments, or even in private prayer, in our relationship to God, to community, to synagogue, to church, to whatever it is that religion gives us as a house to enter. And the misgiving, or I should say, the falsehood, I'd say, is the notion that's sweet that I think many of us, maybe all of us, were fed as children in Hebrew school or by our parents, a bubby, a zaidi, and it was that if we do good things, only good things will happen to us. If we do mitzvot, if we say the prayers frequently and fervently, if the mezuzah in our doorpost, on the doorpost is kosher, then God forbid, but colitis and cancer and war, they'll all go somewhere else but not to us. And I say shame on us if we perpetuated that myth. And maybe that's the reason why so many of our kids and their kids and the family members of this collective family, the Jewish people and people of churches and mosques, people of faith, walked away from faith because they were fed a child's version of faith that the family never bothered to upgrade to adulthood. To say there is war, and there is famine, and there is struggle, and there is suffering, and there is disease. And that prayer won't necessarily give you a cure, but it will give you healing, and that's utterly different. I would say that in a way that I've never thought about it in my 28 years, I feel like I need to be in two places right now. One of them is here to deliver a message, hopefully of some hope and meaning and purpose, and the other is there with you. Because as a rabbi, I need to stand here and fulfill my role as a rabbi, but as a Jew, I need to be next to fellow Jews tonight. I need your shoulders next to mine. Jews need their fellow Jews now more than ever. When I came into this church tonight and I met with the wonderful people of the church, they said, we gathered, we prayed for you this morning. And I thought, I don't need more than that. If we look at our texts, Proverbs, Psalms, Torah, none of it says that we'd be spared the arrows, the slings and arrows, as Shakespeare put it, of outrageous fortune. We know because we know our lives, our stories. We know the suffering just here in this room. We know what it is to be a Jewish people in the last year. So the idea that if we say certain words a certain way, repeat the formula over and over again, make sure to touch the mezuzah, that will be enough, I think does disservice to us and to God and to the wisdom of the wisdom tradition that is Judaism. If you look at the core text of these high holy days, it's Unetane Tokef. And Unetane Tokef says at its center, at its core, in the full text that we have, it says there will be suffering, there will be loss, and there will be death in the year to come. It even has the gall, the temerity to describe how some people in our midst of our world and in these seats will suffer and will die in the year to come. And what it says, rather than denying us the illusion that that won't happen, it says this will happen. Embrace reality that God gave you, the preciousness of life, this moment that's good, and the next one that's good, and connect the two and turn good into goodness. And then if you look at the text of Unetane Tokef, it says something else. It says, but, and, tzedakah, tshuva, tefillah, 3 remedies will not cure you of the ailment that will bring death at some point to someone, but instead they will make this life livable and meaningful. Tshuva, to be reflective, because that connects you to other people. Because we can't be in relationship if both of us aren't reflective. If only one of us is looking beyond our hair in the mirror, how can we possibly connect to a level of depth? How can we engage heart to heart if all we see is exterior of ourselves? If that's all we bring to relationship? And tefillah is prayer, and as I said earlier in the service, tefillah isn't just saying the words because our bubby, our zaidi, our rabbi told us what to say. It's entering into our hearts and being reflective about that as well, so that opens our hearts to the curative power of being part of the Jewish people who pray in this way. And tzedakah isn't just putting money in the pushka as we did as kids, and I hope now. It's being generous of ourselves. It's opening our hearts to one another and our wallets and our efforts. It's saying my life will be transformed despite all the challenges that will be in a human life in the next year. My life will be utterly transformed if I live outwardly. Elie Wiesel was asked, why do we have a congregation? What is a congregation? And Wiesel said, well, it's not to pray. We can pray at home. It's to care for one another. That's what it is to pray as a community. That's what it is to belong. The Gera Rebbe, about 110 years ago, came into his study, into the shul, and he saw his disciples, and he tapped one of them on the shoulder. We'll call him Shmuley as well. And he says to Shmuley, he says, I want to ask you, how is Moshe Leib? He says, oh, I don't know. He says, you don't know how Moshe Leib is? You pray under the same roof to the same God in the same prayer book. You put tefillin and talis on right next to him all the days of the week and of your life. And when I ask you how he's doing, the care that he needs, whether he needs to be fed or clothed or simply stood beside, you don't know? There's something extraordinary about living in each other's lives rather than next to each other's lives. We know that the majority of Americans don't know their neighbors. Maybe know them by name, but don't know much more about them other than the car they drive and the dog that does something on your lawn. But what would it be like if we lived differently? What would it be like if, as a result of tonight, we made a decision to change our presence in the world, this world? Family first, then family, community, and then family, the strangers, in Ralph's and Vaughn's, and even on the 101. What would it be like if we made a decision to live outwardly for the rest of our life, but maybe just for a day at a time? If you look at history, there were different eras, and each era produced a different kind of human being. The Greeks gave us democracy, and with that they gave us the idea of the citizen. The Renaissance Europeans gave us the gentleman. The frontiersman was born of America, the colonial period of America. And now we're living in an era of something that has never existed on this planet, which is the age of what I'd call the consumer. How proud we must feel. But think about each of these eras and what they bring. The Greek was part of a society intrinsically, organically connected to the people around him, and realized fealty, loyalty to human beings in his community. That was a natural part of his world. The European had something called noblesse oblige, the idea of loyalty to the community around to take care of those more needy, more hungry, needing the care of other people. But the consumer is unique. The consumer is hyper-autonomous and hyper-independent. The consumer thinks about his or her own autonomy and need first. WIIFM, tattooed on the chest. What's in it for me? The primary question asked in all encounters. What's in it for me? How will this satisfy my need? What will I get out of it? What's the cost-benefit ratio? That's the consumer. That's what we were raised to be. That's what our kids are being raised to be. To live in terms of the value that they can get rather than imagine educating our kids, these generations, and even our own generations, because we're all educatable, thinking about the value that we can give. Think about what it is to live in a world in which you alter your orientation to experience and to people. Instead of saying, what will I get out of this encounter? How very Hollywood of us. What will I get out of this belonging, this synagogue, this club, this group, whatever it is, this society, this friendship? Instead, we come into encounter and say, how will this give me the opportunity to grow as a giver, as a heart in my world? Imagine sleeping that night differently. Think about what happens within a human soul, a human being's neshama, when in that day you did something that didn't benefit you. If it did, it's like a mitzvah. We say of a mitzvah, the benefit of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. The benefit of a good deed is the good deed. It doesn't mean that at night you don't feel infinitely better because you did it. But consider what it is to live in a world that needs us to be able to answer the question, how is Moshe Leib? And to say, I visited him and he's still ill, but he was smiling. I go to hospitals frequently. Rabbi Julie goes to hospitals frequently. Sometimes, I don't know about her encounters, but my encounters over so many years, sometimes I find that I was the only person other than the family, if family visited, that visited the patient. That's our job for one another. To belong is to care for one another. And I understand that the reason that many of us don't is we don't want to get into the tsuris of somebody else's life. And another reason is because we just don't know how to do it. We feel inept. We think, what will I say? But what I learned so long ago is what you say in those moments matters the least. So say the least. Just show up. Your face, your presence in the chair, your willingness to see their face, their presence in the bed is all that it takes. The rabbis say that when we visit someone who is ill, we take away 1/60th of their ailment. I won't argue with their math, but the spirit of it is beautiful, isn't it? It says no matter how you come, no matter who you are, you have something to give, and sometimes that is simply silence, presence, a smile, a warm hand, an embrace, a glass of water. The willingness to say, I won't farm that out to a professional, the crises of our lives. I won't look for emergency roadside Jewish assistance when I need it. Instead, I'll realize that that's the imperative in my life. That's where I'll get the benefit of belonging to the Jewish people by showing up as a Jewish person for the people in this world. We need, I believe, in this moment more than ever, to enlarge ourselves. I feel like Superman who wants to rip open his cape and show the big Jewish star on my chest. It's only that small. But to say we need to show ourselves not through a star and jewelry, not an emblem, but that every act of our lives is an emblem of our faith in one another, in God, and in ourselves, and in the Jewish people. That this is the year that we've been given. That this is the year that we've been given to step forward and enlarge our presence in each other's lives. Not just to look to the social worker, the psychologist, the rabbi, to show up in crisis, to be there and encounter, but to realize that God gave us the ability to deliver that gift as well. One of my favorite thinkers right now, on Instagram, in books, on podcasts, is a psychologist and a professor at Harvard University in their happiness lab, Arthur C. Brooks. I'd like to work in a happiness lab, by the way. Arthur C. Brooks. Imagine, by the way, showing up miserable to work. It's not a good day. But imagine Arthur C. Brooks says this. He says, there are two different kinds of bucket lists that we might want to pursue in our lives. One is the stuff, the things, and the experiences that we want that will satisfy our needs and our desires and our appetites. And the other is utterly different. But the other one produces deep love and lasting happiness. It doesn't have price tag, can't turn it over and find a brand or where it was made. It's made in the heart. It's a life lived differently. And I'll tell you that when I look at you, every time I look at you, Shabbat, in classes, in these services once a year, whenever we're together, which is so often these days, I realize that there's so many people in this life for whom I'm affirming the life that you're living. If you're not nodding and saying, thank you, God, this is the way I'm living my life, these are the choices that I'm making, then I want to tell you, you deserve to be nodding and saying, yes, that's how I lived yesterday, let me live it again today and tomorrow. But there's so many great exemplars in this community, here and here and here. So many people who are showing you that they're living outwardly, that they're happier for it. That when they come to crisis, or when they come to a crisis that isn't or is theirs, they realize that they're buoyed by a community of shared values. And I'd ask you to stand up and put up your hand and say, yes, that's how I'm living my life, but that isn't that synagogue that we're in. Instead, I just want you to look at yourself and say, let me make a commitment in this year ahead to live that way again, and only more so. We get to choose who we are in the world. We get to choose how we appear, how we show up in the world. We get to choose the depth of our being. We get to choose the depths of our encounters. We get to choose how open our hearts will be, because the heart only closes by virtue of the mind making that decision. Otherwise, it was designed to be open to human life and struggle and love. We get to choose our pronouns. We can be I and me, it's a choice, or we can be we and us. It's a choice as well. L'Shana Tova.